98. Good evening, everybody. Got some special guests tonight. Obviously, Simon Bean, MBE, who we know, who's got extensive knowledge of the security situation in the UK and globally, and also a very special guest, Cliff from Belfast. Cliff is a research journalist who has many years of researching security matters, the deep state, and the way that the deep state tries to manipulate media. So welcome to my two guests tonight. We've got a lot to cover, so we're going to crack straight on. And I'm going to play a video, and the video is by a gentleman who many years ago worked as an undercover soldier in Northern Ireland. Security sources in Northern Ireland would tell you that his testimony is absolutely true. He now lives in hiding, probably in the United States. That seems to be where they all go. He now lives in hiding. But this, we got this video from YouTube, and it's a very interesting introduction to what we're going to talk about tonight. So I'm just going to play this video. And
I go by the name of Kevin Fulton. I was a serving British soldier when I infiltrated the Provisional IRA for the British Army's highly secretive Force Research Unit. I spent many years inside the IRA spying for the Army, MI5 and police. When I outlived my usefulness as a spy, I was set up to be murdered by another British agent going by the name of Steakknife. I had one controller that helped me in my fight to stay alive. I am now in my 10th year of a legal battle for a new identity and a security package from the British authorities. First of all, we are a nation full of spies and undercover operatives. People are always saying we are heading to be a police state. Well, while the nation was sleeping, we have been a police state for many years. Our police forces.
So that sets the context of really where we're going tonight. We're going to look at the question: is the UK becoming a police state? And I think we all know the answer to that. That as Kevin Fulton says there, the United Kingdom is a police state. Cliff, could you tell us a bit about the way the security services have manipulated media? We were talking about before we came on air, since really the 1970s in Northern Ireland, and how that relates to the way they operate in the United Kingdom. And then obviously we'll come on to other things like 77 Brigade as time goes on. Could you just set the context for that there, Cliff?
Yeah, well, if we're specifically looking at the BBC, I mean, it's well known, the BBC have even admitted this themselves. If in order to have a job with the BBC, you had to have clearance from MI5. And so you have this strange spectre almost that if you wanted to work as a journalist within the British Broadcasting Corporation, that you actually had to be vetted by MI5, and they had to say that you were okay. And even as early as 1984, we've been aware of a secret memorandum that went out within the echelons of the BBC that specifically targeted people, saying that if you were members of the Communist Party of Great Britain, or the Socialist Workers' Party, or the Workers' Revolutionary Party, or any left-wing group that had militant tendencies, that you weren't to be employed. And people would say, well, we're seen as somewhat right-wing, so wasn't that a good thing? We not really, because it also targeted people who had sympathies with the National Front or the British National Party. Not groups that any of us here have sympathies with, but it's the fact is that you were being targeted for employment, and that is illegal. Targeted by employment because of your political persuasion or viewpoints or what you expose to. You also have to realize that there are 5, if we're looking specifically about media interference from governments, there are 5 levels of interference. Level 1 has no rules at all. You have a free media, a free press. And it's interesting, specifically, if you look at terrorism in the media, a book that was published in the 2000s, and it tells you specifically that the BBC was at level 5. That specifically the BBC had detailed rules and codes and guidelines that brought it to level 5. And level 5 is the highest level of interference, of governmental interference. And it says that the BBC virtually had rules of guidelines covering every aspect of its running, and even reporters were advised on what terms and what words had to be used on air and weren't allowed to. And we see that continually. We saw it in Northern Ireland, that really the BBC Northern Ireland really was an extension of the NIO and only put forward governmental policies.
And it seems as well, I mean, we were talking earlier about the publications that, I mean, obviously Northern Ireland is a very small country. Coming up to not the Anglo-Irish Agreement, the Belfast Agreement in 1998, the Good Friday Agreement as it's called, that there was huge pressure and influence brought to bear on publications. Did you say it was 13 publications that were basically being fed information from the state?
You're dealing there with the Kelly Memorandum, quite a famous memorandum that came out in 1998, and it dealt really with the government's policy on the referendum. Now, remember that a referendum is something that is put to the people. A government shouldn't really be involved or have an opinion on the referendum. To do so would be seen as illegal. But we see that Kelly puts forward his, and it's a leaked document that Kelly had put forward in this memorandum, that how the NIO would be behind the scenes influence certain media outlets, and how that would work. And it's interesting because he says there are 13 media outlets in Northern Ireland that they could influence, because it was seen as the most crucial election and campaign in Northern Ireland's history. Now, that's interesting because they're actually saying that we'll influence these people, and we'll have that. Now, if you think of the size of Northern Ireland, 13 million, Northern Ireland's quite a parochial place. It's a small place, probably around that time, probably 1.7 million people, and 13 media outlets covered the whole of the populace.
That's basically, you're talking every single paper from national level to local level was being influenced by whoever, the deep state, to basically achieve an aim that they were looking for. And obviously what seemed to happen was it seemed to be that back in those days the government, and again it was exactly the same in mainland UK, you had MI6 and MI5 meeting with the editors of local newspapers, national newspapers, sorry, on a regular basis, and feeding them little tidbits of information. But as well as that, the more we look at it, it seems that there were actually agents of influence working within those newspapers, either on the board level or at editorial level, to push the narrative in a particular direction. And then in the late 90s and early 2000s, when the internet came, obviously their whole fiefdom was completely blown apart and destroyed. I'm going to play another video here, and again, it's relevant to what we're looking at. I'm going to play a video about the Five Eyes. We always hear about the Five Eyes, and that's the intelligence services of the UK, Canada, America, New Zealand, and Australia. And we're led to believe that they're a very benevolent force working for our good. But I think this video hopefully we'll put that in a little bit of a different context, and you see that we are actually being completely shafted by people who should be looking after us. So just bear with me while I pull this video up.
Have you ever seen the movie Wizard of Oz? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's all about power, money, and control.
The 9/11 terrorist attacks on the United States gave the Five Eyes a legitimate reason to expand.
It was going in this direction anyway, but 9/11 incredibly accelerated it. Once you got the terrorist attack here, we became very unforgiving in not grabbing communications. And so we accelerated our ability, our, for want of a better word, invasiveness into communications networks in which legitimate targets coexisted with legitimately protected communications.
There was a distinct change after September 11. Something changed which, at least in the smaller agencies, had been a no-go zone, which was using these Cold War massive national security resources against the citizens of the Five Eyes countries. That had been something that just never usually happened in a country like New Zealand or Australia or Canada. And September 11 loosened that. The United States and Britain completely dropped all their sense of restraint about it. And these agencies are closer to each other than they are to their own governments.
As a result of changes since September 11, 2001, the Five Eyes Alliance is now capable of capturing virtually every phone conversation, email, internet search, or social media entry in the world.
What kind of information? Your location for where you currently are. Text messages, emails, your buddy lists, your calendar as it gets sent around the world. If you're having a video chat with somebody, that gets recorded.
Now, again, from the point of view of where we're coming from with this, and I just want to bring Simon on this. I mean, Simon, we're not coming at this from an anti-patriotic point of view. It's quite the opposite. We're coming at this as veterans and British patriots that are basically very alarmed at the way we're probably been spied on. I'm almost certain that anyone that's been involved in this movement for the past 2.5 years, your phone's tapped, they've got all sorts of surveillance on you. They know everything that you've done in the past 2.5 years. It's, to me, we are a police state, and we need to tell the truth about what the state are up to, as well as telling the truth about what the communists, the Islamists, the Nazis are up to. We need to also call the state to account. Would you agree with that, Simon? What's your thoughts on it all?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, Richard, to be fair. In the good old days, when the world was in black and white, we had two Germanys and a common enemy, which was the Soviet Union. Things were quite simple. And then in 1989, when the wall came down, of course, shortly thereafter, the Soviet Union sort of fell apart, and at the same time, the tech giants were producing mobile phones that you could actually place in your pocket instead of carrying around on a trolley, etc., etc. Social media sort of came of age, and suddenly we're in an IT world. And ever since then, the intelligence services that have always been there to protect us, with the Five Eyes intelligence gathering resource, really is what it is, which, as that little film stated, is really always used to be just sort of a pair of eyes. It was between the US and us, and other people, other countries tended to work alone. But as, of course, 9/11 occurred, everyone decided to sort of pool their resources, gather information together, and share it, amongst themselves. And so we now have that Five Eyes information gathering and sharing resource, which is a fantastic resource, and it should be used as it was designed, really. To counter terrorism, counter threats to our country. And my concern is now that instead of somebody in Australia who works for the intelligence services passing up his chain and eventually across the chain to us, stating something along the lines of, we've had a bit of information, there's going to be a terrorist knocking on your door in the UK on a certain date. This is exactly what his plan is. This is where it's going to happen, etc., etc., which is brilliant sort of information sharing, and can be countered then by our own MI5 and police. That seems to have been sort of shelved a little bit, and this Five Eyes information gathering network, if you like, is being used against its own people, not just in our country, but in other countries throughout the Western world also. And that's kind of the way that the Soviets used to do business when they used to spy on their people. And I'm a little bit worried that we're turning into a socialist police state, I suppose.
Can I just bring Cliff in there? Cliff, you said something earlier about how people were now identified as terrorists. Could you just talk a bit about that? The idea that that terrorism is no longer about planting bombs and shooting people. Just go into that, what you said earlier about terrorism, because it's very relevant to how they perceive anybody that literally doesn't toe the party line.
Yeah, a lot of this thinking was really brought about this perspective of probably Professor Jose Gantier, and he said terrorism today is an information crime. It cannot operate without modern social communication media. Terrorist violence is merely the springboard for real terrorism, which is communicated terrorism. So really what he's implying there, and what other people, especially in the securocrats, have brought on board, is that terrorism, physical force terrorism, is only a way to actually get your message heard. The real terrorism, what can influence people, propaganda, if you will, that's real terrorism. So if you can influence people, that you can manipulate or take away from what government policy is, or you can actually veer individuals or dislocate government policy, that's the real threat to the state.
And I think that, I mean, what you said there as well, Cliff, was you talked about securocrats, and I used to laugh when Martin McGuinness used to always spout on about securocrats, because I found it quite amusing that Sinn Féin were talking about securocrats when most of their members were probably working for MI5 anyway. But that's an aside and another story. I just want to keep this fairly light, but. The reality is that Martin McGuinness was actually right, and we probably shouldn't have laughed at him as much as we did, because the state is run by securocrats. I want to ask a question to all the viewers there this evening. If someone could put it in the comments, who do you think the most powerful man is currently in the UK? I'm going to show a video of the most powerful man in the UK in a minute, but who do you think the most powerful man in the UK is? If you want to stick it in the comments, feel free. And I'm going to pull this guy's video up here, and I'm sure a lot of people will be surprised at who appears on the screen.
But we've also got in the City of London, one of the world's great financial hubs, highly flexible labour market, natural geography, connections to the world, the most globalised economy in the G20. And so for a country like ours, in order to be able to have the effect that we want to have, the global influence we want to have in our national interest, through a program or a strategy we've described as Global Britain, the challenge has been to bring all of those capabilities, national, not just national security or governmental capabilities, together in a coherent way in order to support our national security, our national economic, and our global influence. And we've called that approach fusion. But essentially, it's at its heart it's about bringing all of those capabilities together in support of that, and enabling us, therefore, to have a greater impact than we would if we operated any of those.
Okay, the gentleman there you're seeing on screen is a gentleman called Sir Mark Sidwell. He's the head of the Cabinet Office. He's the top civil servant in the United Kingdom. He's also the head of national security. And I'm going to just show you a screenshot of the power that this one individual has.
You were making the point.
So this is from UK Column, a video they did
GCHQ's
last week, and there's no point in trying to reinvent the wheel, because I think UK Column on this have absolutely knocked it out the ballpark. So there you see Sir Mark Sidwell, and he's the head of national security. He's the national security advisor to the government, which means he's in charge of GCHQ, MI5, SAS, MI6, Joint Biosecurity Centre, and also, as we see now, the 77th Brigade, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But when he's talking about the fusion doctrine, what he's talking about is gathering all the power of the state to one individual. At the moment, he is the individual that is in complete control of all those organs of state. Obviously, he's accountable to the government, allegedly, but we really do wonder how accountable he is. Cliff, what do you think about that? I mean, what do we do when we've got one man with all that sort of power? Is that a worrying development?
Well, I think it's a worrying development that one individual will be. I don't think he's more of a figurehead, but the reality is we now have a government who has really engaged in complete propaganda and control of society. And Alou says in his book about propaganda, he says propaganda has such an ability to affect the psychological transformation and such an impact on the very core of man that it is inevitable has a military force when used by a government. There is no simple use of propaganda. A propaganda conflict is hardly less serious than an armed one. Now, where does that leave us? Because he's actually saying the forthright manipulation of the populace under widespread propaganda regime that we're seeing in the United Kingdom today is a conflict no less greater than actually an armed conflict. And of course, that takes us to 77 Brigade, where we're now going to look at probably later on. Why is a military operation taking place against the civilian populace of the United Kingdom?
And the other thing is as well, Cliff, I think, and we'll go into this now. Actually, I think it's not even just against the civilian population. I mean, we're obviously being surveilled because the powers that be have decided that anybody that is slightly worried about Islamic terrorism, is worried about the rise of the extreme far left, is worried even about the rise of the extreme far right, is now classed as intolerant. I'm just going to again pull up. I'll try and pull this up on the screen here. So just bear with me, guys, because I'm going to go to a different page. Just give me 2 seconds. So here we go. Okay, what we've got here, can you all see that on the screen? Okay, yeah, is that up there yet?
Yeah.
You got that? Good. Okay, so basically what we've got here is the UK government, the Home Office fact sheet on right-wing terrorism. And I just want to read a couple of paragraphs here. It's not a very long document, but I just want to read 2 paragraphs. First paragraph I want to read states this: following the terrorist attacks in 2017, the Joint MI5 and Counter-Terrorism Policing Operational Improvements Review proposed an increased role for MI5 and JTAC in extreme right-wing terrorism. Now, I just want to put that in context. In 2017, hundreds of people were killed and injured by Islamist jihadi terrorists. And yet, in 2017, MI5 and JTAC suddenly decide they want to target the so-called far right. As far as I know, there have been, I think, 2 or 3 fatal attacks carried out by lone wolves who didn't seem to have connection with any other terrorist organization stemming from the right since 2010. 2, possibly 3 fatal attacks. I could be wrong on that. I'll stand corrected if I am. And yet the government seems to think that it's okay to put serious amounts of resource in that, when to me they should have been fighting against the Islamists. Now, then we come down to where it talks about countering right-wing extremism. Again, I'm going to read a paragraph. The far right has absolutely no place in Britain. Now, why don't they say that about the far left? Why don't they say that the communists are equally as dangerous as the far right? And we've all, everybody knows our stand against genuine Nazis. We have no time for them whatsoever. We stand against them, and we get a lot of pushback for standing against them. But what does the government class as someone who is far right? Well, I'm going to read their dictionary definition of someone who's far right. The British people overwhelmingly reject the prejudiced rhetoric of the far right, which is the antithesis of the values that this country represents: decency, tolerance, and respect. Now, does that mean that we have to tolerate Islamic rape gangs, jihadists, Do we have to tolerate the far-right Nazis who deny the Holocaust? Do we have to tolerate the far left who want to take us to a Maoist China? You see, this is very, very sinister, that they're targeting people who won't tolerate evil. And so that brings us all into the sphere of this, and that's what they've done. They've lumped every single person who disagrees fundamentally with a certain ideology as being intolerant and not having respect for those different ideologies. And to me, that is where this is all going, and that's the dangers that we have now with 77 Brigade and the other organs of state that are being wielded against people in our movement. And we're going to look at this shortly, but I mean, I've been shadow banned from Twitter. Several other patriots have been banned from Twitter, Facebook. We all got banned from Facebook. And it appears now, when we examine this, that the reason that we're being banned and shadow banned is because the state is actually has people in very, very high positions of influence within these organizations like Twitter and Facebook and so on and so forth. I'll give you an example. Twitter,
if I can just
yes,
jump in there a sec, mate. I think that's where all our issues lie, because the vast majority of people within the UK, irrespective of their colour or religious beliefs, have an issue with the far left and the far right extremists.
Yep.
And the way that they should be countered has always been the use of the security services. So the security services in the UK is MI5, with military intelligence being MI6 on the outside, if you like, of the country, looking in, protecting us from the outside threat. Now, when you couple that, the fact that the vast majority in our country is against extremism in any way, shape or form, and then you make this the responsibility of one single man called, is he Sir Mark Sedwell, or is he just Mark Sedwell? Sir Mark. You know, there's a bit of a serious rub there, because you've now got one man in charge of everything that's remotely extremist. Now, he obviously heads up the cabinet office. Within cabinet office, we've got the Cobra briefing room, which is cabinet office briefing room number 1, but they call it Cobra briefing room A for Alpha because it sounds better. The Prime Minister heads up most of the meetings that are in there. Mark Sedwell was also always present because he's the head of the Cabinet Office. And then you get all the other people in there as well. Well, yeah, if Mark Sedwell isn't there to make these decisions or advise the Prime Minister on what is to be done, what does the Prime Minister do? Who does he ask for that information and advice? When you bear in mind that just recently with COVID-19, you had the Prime Minister incapacitated and Mark Sedwell incapacitated at the same time. So who was making the decisions then? Was it Dominic Raab, which is the second in command, if you like? If it was, who was taking over from Mark Sedwell for this information? And was information perhaps passed down and ratified behind the closed doors of the Cabinet Office without the Prime Minister and Mark Sedwell even knowing about it?
Well, exactly. I mean, I think the issue as well is when we look at what's happened recently, and again, you know, obviously we've got to be very careful talking about leaks, but you know, we're reliably informed that when Boris and Dominic Cummings were incapacitated with COVID-19, that there was a plot to extend the.
So there you are. There, then you had all three incapacitated at the same time. So you had Mark Sedwell, who's probably the most powerful man in the UK, coupled with the Prime Minister and his special advisor, who's in the news quite a bit recently, all off work together with the same disease,
exactly,
in inverted commas.
Exactly. Now, and I think the thing about this is when Boris and Dominic Cummings came back to work, Cummings found out that this plot was there to basically stop Brexit, because what they were trying to do was delay us leaving the European Union, and in delaying us leaving the European Union, we'd have got tied into a whole lot more business with the European Union. So they were trying to, when I say leaving the European Union, delay the transition period and extend that. That's what they were trying to do. Cummings and Boris found out about it. Cummings wasn't as meek and mild as he was in the garden of Number 10. Spat his dummy out and basically gave a whole lot of people a complete bollocking, and reversed the decision. As well as that, we're also led to believe that Mark Sidwell was going to have some of his power stripped away from him. Again, it seems this is what we're being told. It seems at the behest of Dominic Cummings. So as soon as this all happens, the story breaks about Dominic Cummings, and I've never seen such a feeding frenzy against one man as there has been against this. And I believe the plot to get rid of Dominic Cummings is a deep state plot, and I believe they're doing it because Dominic Cummings, they know Dominic Cummings is the only man that can properly deliver Brexit, because obviously Boris has got the civil servants, Tory MPs, goodness knows who else in his ear, probably saying, well, because of COVID-19, we can't deliver Brexit. Whereas Cummings is going to say, we've got to deliver Brexit because that's his thing. Brexit is his baby, along with Nigel Farage, of course. So it seems very, very convenient that the whole of the media establishment, the whole of the political establishment, even the Church of England, for goodness sake, who are no doubt infiltrated by MI5, are now calling for Dominic Cummings to be chopped and to be axed. So that's even before we start looking at 77 Brigade. There seems to be a concerted effort to get rid of Dominic Cummings because they know if they do that, they can stop Brexit. What do you think about that, Cliff? What's your thoughts?
I think we need to realize that as you would normally call these people the camel jockey club, you need to realize what MI6's being is and be all is in this situation. MI6 is not interested in national interests. It's not really of interest what's happening within the United Kingdom or the national interests of the United Kingdom. It's worried about international interests. It always looks to them. And if we understand MI6, what is MI6? How it came about? What has it been? I mean, we almost have to just look back to 1972 when we understand that MI6 put a very sophisticated plan in place to manipulate the voters of the United Kingdom into voting to join the EEC. Now, we look at how they illegally funded the European League for Economic Cooperation. And this was done by a subsidiary of MI6, which was called the Information Research Department of the Foreign Office. And they sent millions of pounds with the help of the CIA to funding different groups' propaganda within the United Kingdom that would eventually bring about a yes vote. And all that was done, it siphoned money off the British Exchequer through the Foreign Office, and it was illegal. Everything that MI6 did in 1972 to secure a vote for the European Economic Community, for Britain to join that community, was done illegally. So here we have a group that says that it is here to protect the United Kingdom, that it is there to fill the United Kingdom and protect its interests, and yet of all, it's undermining its very principle of democracy, and doing so illegally, and doing so by theft of it from its own exchequer.
Exactly.
Now, that didn't end there. That's the problem. It did not end there. It didn't end in 1972. No, it went on. And how do we know it went on? We know it went on because we have Norman Tebbit telling us in 2001 that MI6 continually targeted UKIP and Goldsmith to bring about a collapse of the party so that the European, any objections to the European Union at that time could be overcome. So that has been an ongoing process from MI6 to actually manipulate, control, and destroy opposition to the European Union.
Absolutely, Clifford. And I think it's worth saying as well. Now, again, we've got to be very, very careful what we say, but it would appear, and I'm not saying this is an absolute fact, but it would appear that Mark Sedwell could quite possibly be an MI6 agent or an MI6 operative, because Mark Sidwell is the chairman of the United Kingdom Special Forces Club. To be a member of the Special Forces Club, you have to be either a member of SAS, SBS, 14 Int, FRU, MI5, MI6, or GCHQ. Any one of the undercover and covert units that the British deploy against whoever they see fit, depending on what's happening in the world. So for Mr. Sidwell or Sir Mark Sidwell to be head of the Special Forces Club, we can only presume, because of their joining criteria, that he must have been one of those organizations. Now, we know for sure he wasn't in the SBS or the SAS because he never served in the military. We know he wasn't in MI5 because he didn't serve in the Home Office, as far as we know. But what we do know is that he served for a very, very long time in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, mainly in the Middle East and South Asia, Pakistan, Egypt, etc. So the only conclusion we can come to is that the most powerful man in the country, beside the Prime Minister and Dominic Cummings, who it looks like that there's a concerted effort to push out, is an MI6 operative. And as you've just very eloquently pointed out, Cliff, the MI6 may pretend to have Britain's best interests at heart, but it seems to me that MI6, it's called the Camel Club because of its friendliness with the Saudis and so on and so forth. It seems to be extremely friendly with the European Union, and it is a globalist organization as far as I can see. Now, not everybody is like that, because obviously the
main question has to be asked, and it has to be asked: what is an external body, which MI6 is meant to be an external body? It is not meant to have any legitimate cause within the United Kingdom. It does not meant to have any investigative powers. Why is it involved with trying to manipulate referendums within the United Kingdom? And two, why was it heavily involved in the manipulation of the 1997 parliamentary election to destroy the Conservative Party and UKIP that brought about the rise of Tony Blair?
Exactly. See, it's very similar to the United States with the CIA and the FBI. The CIA works outside, so they're sort of, if you like, the MI6. And then the FBI are the internal staff, so they're more or less the MI5. And you're finding more and more nowadays, and it's portrayed in lots of Hollywood movies, and we all know that Hollywood is controlled by the CIA anyway, to a large degree. But you're getting CIA operatives now doing jobs on the inside of the US within the 50 states. And questions are asked about that on a regular basis, and no more so than by the FBI. Saying, this is our territory, this is our remit. What are you doing? Interfering. And MI6 seems to be doing the exact same thing, don't they? Within the UK, they're manipulating, as you've just said there, they're manipulating what's going on within the UK itself, instead of feeding information into the UK from things that are happening on the outside.
And again, you've got to even, I suppose we could even go back and look at the connections that Martin McGuinness had with MI6 agents, and again, we don't know the full nature of what happened with Martin McGuinness and the MI6 agent that he met allegedly on a regular basis in the north of Northern Ireland. So there's but I think the question we've got to ask now is, are we watching an attempted coup against a Brexiteer government? And I think we are. I think that's what we're witnessing now. And I would just want to leave that question with all the viewers, because I think we need to be taking action. We need to be talking about this. We need to be speaking up about what's happening to this guy, Dominic Cummings, because this is not normal. This is the pressure that man's been put under is not normal. And again, he doesn't seem like a normal sort of individual. There's something a bit strange about Dominic Cummings. But anyway, let's get on to 77 Brigade, because this is what we want to talk about here tonight, is how 77 Brigade again are coming under the influence of Mr. Sidwell and basically MI5, and who's actually involved in 77 Brigade. Now, just to set a bit of context, 77 Brigade actually isn't a bad idea, because it was set up to counter the propaganda war that's been waged by China, the Iranians, the ISIS, Al Qaeda, and so on and so forth. So it was set up to counter some pretty sophisticated propaganda operations. But it seems that the guns have been turned on our own people. There's newspaper reports that 77 Brigade was deployed against people that were lobbying for an Indie Ref 2 in Scotland. Now, I'm totally against Scottish independence. I want to see the UK stay together, and I'll be totally against Northern Ireland going to United Ireland. I want to see the UK stay exactly as it is. So I don't have a problem with arguing against Indie Ref 2, but I do have a problem with a government or a military formation seemingly subverting democracy in Scotland, even though it's subverting something that I totally fundamentally disagree with. And it'd be that same in Northern Ireland. If we had a referendum in Northern Ireland, I would like to think it would be a level playing field. But if we've got these shadowy organizations undermining those sort of decisions, using social media, is that acceptable that happens?
Who's it out there for?
Cliff.
No, it's not acceptable. Democracy is democracy. If you claim to be a democratic state, then you can't use manipulative, you can't use psychological, or you cannot use multimedia control tactics upon the masses. So they're a different thing between actually, this is a different thing from people actually coming along and voting for a party or arguing about how a process should work, or putting forward your political putting along your political opinion in order to defeat your political opponent. This is different. This is manipulation on a spectrum that we have never seen. We did see a bit of it in the 1998 referendum in Northern Ireland, whenever the government put in private bodies and put for instance, here I'm reading from this document, the Kelly document, and they said we need to put together like agents of influence, or what they call champions of our cause, and they specifically said church leaders, heads of community organizations, trade unions, and members of the G7, and they would and the message had to be seen as not coming from big government. It had to be done in such a way that big government wouldn't be seen as the procurers of this message, that it had to be done targeted in such a way that it would look as if it was organic. They use these terms, organic. So it had to be organic. And then eventually, if it's being pushed out enough, it becomes what they call a self-amplifying process. We are seeing that today with the attacks on our Cummings, where it's no longer, it's become self-amplified. Nobody seems to be behind it because it's rolling by itself. But what's interesting, of course, about the government's lobby in the 1998 referendum in Northern Ireland was how it's cultivated the media, and what it actually did, and how it liaised with them. But here's the big thing. They would commission groups and organizations to actually ensure patterns of polling, right? So they would get, specifically at names here, we have commissioned McCann Erickson to do quantitative and qualitative research. Why? And to make sure that it doesn't seem to be inspired by the government.
Yeah.
So and they would develop proposals and put that out there and work with parties, but it was always seen, this isn't government policy, this isn't manipulated by government, this is just an ordinary company doing its own research.
Exactly, and McCann Erickson at the time was the biggest advertising and marketing agency in Northern Ireland, and it also had branches in London, funnily enough. So they could get people from from the Foreign Office or whoever was paying the bills to come into McCann Erickson in London and have their little cozy meetings and decide on what the narrative was going to be. And of course, in Northern Ireland there'd be nothing to see because it was all done from outside the. I mean, I'm guessing. I mean, it's not that's me just surmising. There's a very
Well, I just want to leave on this really, but here's really how interesting this is, and this you see this all the time within a wider UK scale, where it talks about opinion polls. It talks about engaging with it, putting forward and making opinion polls available. But what does it say? It specifically says it is important, therefore, not to ensure that not all the results of opinion polls, etc., will make it into the public domain. So what you have here is groups and policymakers and independent companies who are working for the government on behalf of the government, but who are not seen to be working on behalf of the government. These agents of influence, as you will, as people call them, and they're being told, see the opinion polls that don't go our way, they are not going to see the light of day. So this is a technological propaganda war within the masses.
Exactly.
And it's all controlled by the deep state.
It's control, and now they have a military unit, and it was something that we were talking about earlier before we came on air. They now have a military unit in the United Kingdom that is using information warfare against our people, not just against our people. I want to talk about a gentleman called Gordon Macmillan.
It might be worth, Richard, just for the benefit of those watching, just to let them know what 77 Brigade actually is.
Go for it, Simon. Take a few minutes just to explain exactly what they are.
77 Brigade really was a brigade that was, if you like, resurrected, call it what you will, back in sort of 2015, and they are a psychological warfare unit, and they're designed basically to use psyops, psychological operations, on people, organizations, countries, if you like, that may be a threat to the good people of the United Kingdom. And they do that through disinformation and misinformation. And I think it's worth sort of trying to explain in layman's terms what the difference between the two are. You hear it quite a lot on TV these days. You hear it a lot on mainstream media these days. But disinformation is basically lying. So disinformation is all about directing people in the opposite direction to what they should be going to find out the truth, etc. And it sort of, if you like, comes under disrespectful treatment of people psychologically by filling their heads with these lies. Whereas misinformation is, if you like, bending the truth. So the truth is there. It's too late to tell the lie, so you try and bend that truth so that people are misled into the wrong direction and misdirected from the real truth. And so where we are now, we have people that are in 77 Brigade, and we'll come on to the personnel in a few moments with Richard. But we have a brigade of a mix of regular personnel and reservist personnel, so territorial army, let's say, in old money, working with the security services and the police to look into people's social media, as an example. And if they see somebody put a post up that's 100% truth, they will either take that post down, or if they think that that post has already started to do some damage, they'll use misinformation to change the scope of that original post. So mislead people away from that. And they'll do that perhaps by somebody typing in a comment under a fictitious name. That comment then attracts another comment from somebody genuine. And that comment then gets another misinformation comment from somebody else working with 77 Brigade, until such times as the truth as was in the original post has been smokescreened by all that misinformation and argument into something that people are no longer going to pay attention to. Hopefully, that sort of shines a bit of light into what 77 Brigade do, even though they should be doing it to protect the people of this country. They seem now to be, if you like, doing these psyops, these psychological operations, on the people of the country, and that brings up several questions, which we'll no doubt come to.
Yeah, and I think the question is, we've got to look at who these people are. We'll look at this gentleman, Gordon Macmillan, first, and I've put one of his. I'll just enlarge the screen here. I've put one of his tweets on the screen. Just gonna have to get rid of that. I put one of his tweets on the screen there. Basically, Gordon Macmillan is actively calling for, now we've got to put this in context. Gordon Macmillan is, we think, a lieutenant colonel, possibly certainly in 77 Brigade. We're not sure the rank he holds, but he holds the rank of an officer of some sort in 77 Brigade.
I think it's worth mentioning just there, sorry to interrupt you, Richard, but it appears that 77 Brigade is top heavy with lieutenant colonels. Now, lieutenant colonels tend to be the rank of an officer that would lead a regiment or a battalion in the standard everyday army, conventional army, for want of better words. To have so many lieutenant colonels lumped in one place is pretty unusual. You might find it in a brigade staff, or you might find it in a divisional level headquarters, something like that. But it's more than likely that these people are all getting the rank of lieutenant colonel, because you need to have the rank of lieutenant colonel to access certain levels of security, or the layers of security within the security, if that makes sense. So you could have a sergeant with top secret clearance, but to access certain files within that top secret clearance, you need to be of lieutenant colonel rank. So it could be that it's so top heavy with lieutenant colonels because they're handling such sensitive information.
Got you. And I think when we start looking at these personalities, you mentioned one earlier, Dr. Burridge, but this gentleman, Gordon Macmillan, he's actually calling. Now, he's a lieutenant colonel, we think, in the British Army, probably a reservist. He's also the editorial director, I believe, of Twitter for Europe, Middle East and Africa. So he's a very, very powerful voice in Twitter, and he is actively calling for Dominic Cummings to be sacked, and taking great pleasure that the Prime Minister has been embarrassed by this. Now, this is a lieutenant colonel in the British Army. When I was in the army, officers would not comment publicly on political matters. They were apolitical. They would have had private political views, but they would have not commented publicly. And in fact, we think about what happened a couple of years ago with Soldier X, when he had his photograph taken with Tommy, and he was literally nearly thrown out of the army because he was just a little private soldier that nobody cared about, for having his photograph taken with someone that he didn't even know. This guy, Gordon Macmillan, said this: when the Daily Mail and Daily Mirror are saying the same thing, the PM has nowhere to hide with Dominic. I mean, he uses profanity talking about Dominic Cummings. So this is a guy that's a very senior executive in Twitter, and is also working for 77 Brigade. The first question to ask is, what influence does he have within Twitter, and what influence does he have within 77 Brigade? because there's a complete conflict of interest there. Because if he's this very senior editor in Twitter, he can decide the editorial content, and he can do exactly what his MI6 and MI5 paymasters are basically telling him to do. But it's worse than that, because it shows he actually has a political axe to grind against Dominic Cummings and against the Prime Minister of the day, and he's not hiding that fact. And so that, I mean, that's one of the people that we want to look at. Another gentleman is Dr. Rupert Burridge, who, what did you say, he'd been in the army for 3 months and he became a lieutenant?
He'd actually been in. He'd been in uniform, according to the little bit of research that myself and the UK column had done. He'd been wearing a uniform for less than 3 years, but had already made it to the rank of lieutenant colonel. Now, he's more than likely reserve forces as opposed to regular forces, but if you were to sort of again put it into easy state, if you say it takes roughly 2 years to get through Sandhurst to become an officer, and if you're a graduate, that means you've got a university degree. You'd leave as a full lieutenant, 2 pips. If you haven't got a degree after that 2 years, you'd leave as a second lieutenant. So 1 pip, and then you have to work a period of time to earn the second pip. If you work on that proviso that he's a graduate, so he leaves as a full lieutenant, and then a couple of years down the line, he becomes the captain. A couple of years or so down the line, at best, he becomes a major, and a couple of years after that becomes a lieutenant colonel. Now, to be a lieutenant colonel in under 3 years from start to promotion is highly unlikely, unless he needed that rank for the clearance that comes with it within 77 Brigade. So it's not necessarily that he's earned that position, but he's given that position almost by right to do that job. And perhaps if he was moved into a job that didn't involve intelligence, let's say what he's doing now, he'd probably be reduced in rank to captain or something like that, which wouldn't necessarily be unusual in other armies within other countries, but it's very seldom that it happens in our own. And why it's happening, I don't really understand.
Well, I think what's happening, these people have got a skill set that the government wants to use, but the problem is a lot of them have got a political axe to grind that is really, again, against British national interests. I mean, I'm not saying about this gentleman, but it seems a lot of them certainly, let's say, would veer to the left. And is this the deep state's way? They've done it with the police, they've done it with the civil service. Is this the deep state's way of getting the left-wing establishment control of the military in the same way that they've done with the civil service and the police? I mean, that's just a question. Who knows? I
think that's quite possible, because I don't know of any soldier, sailor, airman of either sex that would join the service and swear the oath of allegiance and take the Queen's shilling, as it is now. I don't believe for one moment that those people joined up with the sole purpose of spying on the people that they've taken the oath to protect.
Yep.
So I would definitely say that this is driven by government. It's probably a part of the government that we don't see. So whether we call that the shadow government or the deep state, I don't suppose it matters what terminology. I'm sure they're being called other things whilst whilst we're airing this out there. I don't believe anybody within the brigade, from sort of lieutenant colonel working down to the lower ranks, are bad people. They're just following orders as you do. But what I'm concerned about is why is 77 Brigade suddenly, if you like, been re-engineered, if that's the right word to use, to control the social media, control our telecommunications, etc., of our everyday life. It seems awfully sort of Orwellian, and the questions that I think need to be asked, and these are questions that David Ellis brought up last week in the UK column, are things like, what is this actually costing the British taxpayer? Because everything has a tax bill. Is this coming out of the defence budget, or is this a separate budget? What are they actually doing? I think we know what they're doing. They're spying on our social media. They're inserting disinformation and misinformation to close people, individuals down, perhaps close ultimately groups down, and ultimately control people's freedom of thought, let's say, and freedom of expression.
It is thought warfare. That's what it is, Simon. It's thought warfare.
Who is their perceived enemy would be question number 3. What do they plan on doing with the enemy once they've captured him or her? And I think the big overall question is, how does any of this actually assist our war effort as a nation? How is this assisting us on keeping an eye and keeping a control of the nasty people that are outside of the United Kingdom looking at doing us harm? How is spying on us and interfering with our freedom of speech and expression protecting us from them? I think that probably is a giant and probably the most important question.
Let me put a sort of frightening scenario forward, or 2 frightening scenarios. Let's hypothetically say that at the next general election, Boris Johnson loses the election because of, let's hypothetically say that COVID's gone really wrong and the economy's crashed and we're all out of a job, we're all broke, we've left the European Union, the rejoiniacs, remember we had the Remainiacs, well the rejoiniacs are the people who want us to rejoin. The rejoiniacs, the far left, the Scottish nationalists, Sinn Féin, IRA are all joining together to really finish off the United Kingdom. And let's just say hypothetically that a left-wing government gains power in the United Kingdom. Now, 77 Brigade would have to act in the interest and under the command of that left-wing government. And obviously, it wouldn't be too difficult for them. It seems like 77 Brigade is stacked with rejoiniacs and left-wingers. That's how it seems to me anyway. Let's just say, for example, that all of a sudden, this new government decide that Northern Ireland should have a referendum and decide whether they want to stay in the United Kingdom. And 77 Brigade is tasked with stopping and frustrating those horrible loyalists in Northern Ireland from keeping Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. That's one scenario. The same thing happens in Scotland, because the people that are controlling the country are now people that actually hate the idea of the United Kingdom as a sovereign independent state. And let's say, for example, Scotland and Northern Ireland suddenly decide to leave the United Kingdom and to join the European Union. And then let's have another scenario that the rejoiniacs manage to get their way and get a referendum about England rejoining the European Union. Again, 77 Brigade and the spooks are tasked with brainwashing people on social media. Now, that's the sort of scenario that I don't think is ridiculously far-fetched, because I believe if 77 Brigade had been fully operational in 2016 and working in the United Kingdom, we may well have had a very different outcome in the Brexit referendum. So that's what's at stake, folks, here. That this unit, unless it is brought under complete scrutiny, and there's got to be some decent politicians still in Westminster who can scrutinize this unit. This unit, people like Mark Sidwell, they need to be scrutinized, they need to be called to account, and we need to make sure that they cannot use organizations like 77 Brigade to influence and undermine democracy, because that's what's at stake here. That's why this is so important. That's why we've gone into so much detail and so much background. Clifford, give us your thoughts on that.
My thought, you are both military men, so you understand that the theater of operations of all military units are understood by those that are in the units, those who are in their employ. If you have Arctic warfare specialists, you know that's where you will take them. if you have people who want to work in jungles, or that's where you'll go along those lines. So, what is the theatre of operation of the 77 Brigade? Well, we can tell by the people who they want to recruit. And who are they specifically targeting to recruit? They want social media experts, digital content experts, historians and research experts, journalists, content creatives, digital, print and audio, videographers, photographers, and individuals with a broad background in marketing, advertising, media production, civil affairs, and stabilization activity. Now, that's the theatre of content for the 77 Brigade. These people will not traipse through the jungles of Africa or far off fields. These people will not go across the north into Russia through the icy wastes. These people will sit in rooms and manipulate the minds of our own people.
Exactly. And that's how. So I mean, there's a Alex has just asked this here. You know, the people have the power. What are we going to do about all this? What can we do to counter this? I mean, obviously, we don't have infinite amounts of time. We don't have infinite amounts of money. What can we do as private citizens of the United Kingdom with the remaining freedoms that we've got? What can we do? Again, I'll ask you, Clifford. What can we do to counter this? How can we fight back? Obviously, peacefully and within the law.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to explain one thing that there was, and this is in a religious context, in a historical context, and also in a political context, and it deals with what took place around the 15th century and how individuals came together and how they were able to overthrow the Holy Roman Empire and the Vatican, who completely controlled and manipulated the whole of Western Europe at that time. And it basically boiled down to what? It came about because of one thing: movable type.
Yeah.
Movable type.
Yep.
So before that, before the Gutenberg press, we had block type, which had to be cut, and it was very expensive. Therefore, you couldn't pamphlet, you couldn't leaflet, you couldn't influence the masses. Then came the invention of the movable type press. And at the same time, individuals like Luther came about, and he started to spread his ideas. And why is that important? Because it gives us a representative of what is taking place today. Because we live in the digital Gutenberg movable type press. At the exact same time as our views and ideas, we now can publish them ourselves. We can educate people. We can show what's taking place. And everybody has a part to play in this, because you need to expose it. If you can't write, if you can't produce, then you share.
Absolutely.
And that's how we beat this. We beat this by education, educating the masses, making them aware of what is the deep state is doing, how they're being controlled, and to question everything that the mass media and the government tell you.
Yeah. And I think we have to do that through a series of questions.
Yeah.
So not just those 5 questions about, you know, who's funding it, how much is it costing, who are they spying on, what are they going to do to them when they've caught them, and etc. etc. But we have to ask sort of fundamental questions, and those fundamental questions are pretty much based on who's actually working within this 77 Brigade. We've got General Sir Nick Carter. He's saying that they're working to take down, as PC Careman there has said, they're working to take down social media and make social media this warm, fluffy place that you go to as a feel-good, a feel-good place to be, as opposed to somewhere where you actually learn stuff that's going on behind the scenes. But I think we need to ask questions such as, where are the checks and balances? And what about the conflict of interest that exists between 77 Brigade and the rest of the military? Because it certainly happens. You've got the rest of the military there using social media on a daily basis, and you've got 77 Brigade spying on the social media that the military is using. So in a way, it's spying on its own soldiers, its own service men and women. But also, you've got people within 77 Brigade, like Tobias Elwood, who was a captain in the Royal Green Jackets, part of the Light Division. Then he retired, went into politics. I met him and spoke to him about Northern Ireland vets, and he came across as a good, decent guy that would do his best. Of course, we were in the same situation, so whether he did or didn't is neither here nor there. But I'm not going to blame him for that, because nobody else succeeded fully either. But here he is now, a lieutenant colonel in 77 Brigade, but he's also the chairman of the Defence Committee. And the Defence Committee chairman is supposed to look at all those checks and balances and ensure that the military is doing its job within the law and within the rules and as they're laid down. Well, how can he check that the military isn't interfering with the day-to-day lives of the people of the United Kingdom, and at the same time be a member of the very brigade that's spying on the individual people within the United Kingdom? Straight away you've got a conflict of interest. And I think if we can make everybody aware that we've got spies that are spying on the spies, and the guy who's actually supposed to keep an eye on fair play is one of the main players within the brigade that is spying on the spies and its people. The whole thing's just it's a can of worms, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And the more you dig into it, Richard, the more tentacles you find. And every time you go down one of these tentacles, it splits off into loads more tentacles. And this has turned into a giant thing just in the 2 or 3 weeks that we've been looking at it.
And we haven't even touched on private sector involvement in these sort of issues. I mean, there's companies like Kinetic that own special forces bases in the United Kingdom. Can you imagine that? The what used to be called the DET, I think it's Special Reconnaissance Regiment now. They used to work out of a place just outside Hereford called Pontrellis. You couldn't find it on a map until Google Maps suddenly exposed it to all and sundry a few years ago. But that is now run by a private company. So you've even got special forces bases run by private companies. Who are they accountable to? Who owns them? Who's making money out of them? There's all these questions to be asked. But I think one of the things about this is, in a way, this is a huge backhanded compliment at what we achieved really in the past, I suppose, from Brexit onwards, because Brexit was really a social media revolution, as Cliff talked about with the Gutenberg press. It was the first shot in a social media revolution. And thankfully, unlike the Reformation, there hasn't been a huge amount of blood spilt in this revolution. It's been a peaceful revolution. But when we started our activism to counter Islamic terrorism in 2017, we basically found that that we were being very, very successful. We were actually winning the propaganda war because we were telling the truth, and it was obviously we were telling the truth. I mean, some of our Facebook posts were getting shared thousands and hundreds of thousands of times, some of them. And Tommy was obviously, he had 1 million followers, I think, on Facebook before they deleted him, something similar on Twitter. His reach was massive, but there were lots of us were smaller players. I'm not going to name them all. There was lots of us that were getting tens of thousands of views on our videos, and we were having huge influence at those demonstrations because people were getting them on their phones and they were going all over the world. And I think that's part of the reason that the government's done this, is to counter our success, because we were changing the narrative and we were moving things in the right direction. And then, of course, we had a leader dropped into UKIP. Now, I'm talking about not Gerard Batten, the one before Gerard Batten, who, again, I'm convinced was an MI6 agent. And so UKIP they tried to implode UKIP. Then the deep state imploded UKIP when we got the veterans and the football lads and Tommy involved. So we know we're up against it, but I still think, would you agree, Clifford, we can still win this. We can still win this battle.
Oh, absolutely. If anything showed the government and the deep state that people still have power, it was Brexit. The reality is, there are psychological terms that the Remainers could not use. And these were terms like freedom, very evocative terms. As someone like you who is involved in sales, you know that. There are deep-seated words that evoke the very being of people. Freedom being one of them.
Truth.
Other words like that the Remainers could not use. And that despite all psychological operations or propaganda saying that the mass media can control 70% of the populace, they couldn't do that with Brexit, because you were able to use those terms that are deep-seated within people's nature. And we still have those terms. We still have that, and we can use that. And we can use it to the benefit of exposing what is dangerous here. And it's the takeover. It might not be a physical or military takeover, but it is the takeover of people's minds.
Absolutely.
The manipulation of the masses. And we need to stand against that at all costs.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Well, guys, unless anybody's got anything else to say, have we missed everything? I think we've got. Have you said everything you want to say, Simon?
Yeah, I think so. The only thing I'm sort of concerned about is the way I'm sort of doing my research now, because even as soon as you research something, you're leaving yourself open to scrutiny. So I'm having to be careful that taking top tips from people like the PC Care Man, who, like, I'm rubbish with IT. I'm absolute rubbish with IT. And any sort of top tips that I can receive from people like the PC Care Man on here, etc., I take with both hands, because every time you research something, it's keywords, isn't it? As soon as you put a keyword in, you're flagged, and somebody's trying to look up your trouser leg. Well, that's fine. I tend to move around quite a bit, so surveilling me is quite difficult in the normal sense. But there comes a time when a man wants to settle down and stay in one place for longer than sort of a week. So we really need to sort of carry on the research, get this information out there, but we really need to use at the same time the free and the paid for bits of kit to protect ourselves before we're just completely closed down and wiped off, and the voice dies. And the only other thing that I've got to say is that as I'm digging up more and more tentacles off the tentacles, I'm worried that somewhere along the line I'm going to come across my own name and find out that I'm actually a member of 77 Brigade, and they haven't yet told me.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it? That would be very interesting. But what
I don't know.
The old Mel Gibson film with what was it called? Conspiracy Theory, where old Mel was actually the spy and he didn't know it all the way through.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, just because you're paranoid, Simon, doesn't mean they're not after you. Clifford, what about you? What do you think?
Right.
Any final thoughts?
No, I think the reality is we just need to keep on going, but be aware of scenarios and situations. It was believed that individuals in Northern Ireland, groups and paramilitaries and other such things were infiltrated to such high levels that 3 out of every 4 at the high levels of those organizations were infiltrated by the British state. We also need to understand and have a look at of how the actual police in England infiltrated groups like CND, the left, and other groups, right-wing groups, and understand that that's still taking place. That even today, whenever you have a group of more than 7 or 8 people together, you have a plant from the state in there.
Absolutely. I think that's
But
that.
But what really is irrelevant to that is if everything is above the law and you're using your influence to influence people and to educate people, that is irrelevant.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the things that we've said from the very beginning of this. You know, there's a lot of people talk about civil war and this, that, and the other, and they're very quite often people that's never fired a rifle in anger or had a rifle or bomb thrown or fired at them in anger. But quite apart from that, I mean, the only way we can do this is by influencing people and getting a critical mass until such a stage that democracy is totally subverted and we realize that we cannot do this by democratic and legal means because there has been a deep state coup and all our freedoms have been taken away. But I don't think we're anywhere near that situation. I think, well, who knows how close we are to that situation, but I think we've got a window now where we can use the technology that's available to influence people. And the other thing is, I think what we've got to really continually remind ourselves and all our viewers and all our followers on social media that we are the good guys.
Yeah.
We are on the side of the angels. We want the best for our country. We want a peaceful, cohesive, united kingdom that's sovereign, independent, and does the best for its people, no matter their religious, racial background. We are a group of people that are for the people, and we're for the real people of this country. And that's an important message that we need to keep telling, because yes, we're against groups that do heinous things. We're against the deep state. We're against the far left. We're against the far right, so on and so forth. But what we are for is we are for the mass populace of the United Kingdom. And like Simon said, whenever we joined the military, we took an oath, and we still stand and live by that oath, that we will put our lives in danger for the country. And I mean, we're not going to do that by taking up arms, but even being an activist in this day and age has a cost. It has a cost. And if me or Simon went for a job like you were talking about earlier, Clifford, we're not going to get employed in certain sectors because of our activism, because you can't even your future employer doesn't even need to phone MI5. They just have to Google your name, for goodness sake, and they'll find out.
They use what's called open source intelligence to determine why your employability.
Exactly. So there's a cost for this, but at the same time, it's a cost worth paying. And many times you get disheartened. You think, for goodness sake, is it worth the cost? But it is absolutely worth the cost. You were talking about the religious wars in the Middle Ages and the great Protestant Reformation, and many of those men forsook all to follow Christ. And the reality is, we've got to forsake everything to do what we've got to do here. We've got to be willing to pay whatever the cost is to save our country and save the people of our country. And I think if we can have 100 men who are totally committed to that and have the time and the resources to do that, then we can achieve great things, and we can make 77 Brigade look like the little pipsqueak. Listen, do you know what 77 Brigade are? They're just little geeky IT managers. That's all they are. We don't have to be afraid of them.
I think that's what you have to remember as well, that you still have to support your armed forces, because your armed forces are without doubt the best armed forces in the world. And I truly believe that. And I know I'm a little bit biased, but I agree. Honestly believe that, having worked with a lot of them around the world. 77 Brigade, the vast majority of the 2,000 to 3,000 that are in it are top people, because they're the boys on the ground, the boys and the girls on the ground.
Yep.
It's the people that control 77 Brigade. They're the people to watch. They're the ones that I don't have sleepless nights because of them, because I'm not that, I don't worry, honestly, too much about that kind of thing. I just know what they are capable of. if they really wanted to turn the thumb screws. But it's not so much the people within the brigade, I don't think, that we need to worry about. It's the people that are controlling that brigade, isn't it, Richard? It's
Absolutely.
it's that bit of the government that we never see because they're hidden away, they're tucked away somewhere, pulling the strings of the government that we do see. That's the bit that I get a little bit concerned about.
And I genuinely believe if I mean, again, we've got contacts that are quite close to Dominic Cummings, and I genuinely believe that people like Dominic Cummings genuinely want to drain the swamp. You know, the swamp's been partially drained in Parliament. It needs to be fully drained. That's why we need to have a political movement, political voice in Parliament. But the swamp in Parliament needs to be fully drained. It's been partially drained. The swamp in the civil service needs absolutely. It needs to be not drained. It needs to be dehydrated. It needs to have all the juice sucked out of it. And what's even more insidious is the mainstream media. I find the mainstream media absolutely vile, and they need to be discredited. I mean, I'm not talking about doing anything sinister. They need to be discredited, and they need to be shown for what they are. And that's why we do shows like this. That's why we take, an hour and a half of our time on a Wednesday night to talk about these things and bring these things to people that maybe haven't heard them, and maybe people know them, but they need to be reminded. And I think, like Cliff said, if we keep on doing this and then the viewers keep on sharing this information, we can still win it. And even if it closes down on social media, but I think we need to be looking at legal challenges to social media companies as well when they are literally trampling on our freedom of speech and our fundamental human rights, basically, which is what seems to be happening. Well, guys, I think we'll maybe finish there. We've gone for nearly an hour and a half. I hope that the content was enjoyed, and the viewers, we've had around 90 viewers from the beginning of the night onwards. So thanks everybody for watching. If I could ask you all to do me a huge favor, like this video and share it as widely as you possibly can, because I think this information needs to get out to the general public as much as possible. Share it with your friends, share it with people that you've got influence with, and also if you could subscribe to the channel as well, because we're going to be doing these interviews and chats on a regular basis. And again, I just want to thank Cliff and Simon for joining me again. It would have been very daunting doing all this on my own, so thanks very much, guys. And the other thing is, watch out, we're gonna launch Veterans for Truth and Freedom in a big way when we get the time to get everything sorted out. The website, we've got our social media pages, so you can join those on Facebook, VK, and Twitter. And we're going to keep pushing this. We're not going to give up. We're going to keep pushing for truth and for freedom. So thanks again, guys, and we'll see you all soon.
Look after each other and stay safe.
Final words, Cliff?
Well, thank you for inviting me on. It was very entertaining, educational, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Cliff. See you all soon. Thanks now. Bye.
Thanks, Cliff.
Bye.